Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Adrian Samays, and I'm here to talk to you about accelerating your journey to Microsoft Virtualization. I'm a senior technical engineer within the EMC Microsoft Alliance relationship. So I work closely with Microsoft up in Redmond, developing virtualization technologies within EMC and working with Microsoft around their virtualization strategies. So if you didn't notice, it's a EMC-led session, but don't be scared. I'm not a sales guy. We do have plenty of other salespeople in the back that'll tackle if you try to leave. But I'm going to really try to limit how much I talk about, say, EMC products and talk about more around accelerating the journey to a Microsoft virtualization and how technologies from Microsoft, some technologies from EMC, and other technologies that are out there can help you along the way. I also have my blog site here if you'd like to follow that. I tend to blog specifically around EMC and Microsoft virtualization technologies. So taking a look at the agenda, I want to talk a little bit around what is cloud, right? I don't know if you guys have heard the word cloud about, 1,000, 2,000 times? So I find that there's different definitions for cloud. I'm going to give you mine. And then from there, we'll go into talk a little bit about the journey into really a private cloud, a Hyper-V private cloud implementation. And what is that journey, right? So what are the steps to take to get you there? Specific phases that we'll walk through, examples as you go through it, and then wrap it up. So looking at it, this is probably not a surprise for a lot of you, right? A lot of the challenges within IT is that there's challenges and pressure to be able to continue to reduce costs, to simplify the environment, to be able to consolidate, right? Not just equipment, but probably even resources as well. Being able to reduce overall costs, but yet still being innovative, right? And flexible, being able to support the environment. And at some point, there's a tipping point around this. If you look at it today, physical infrastructure has many different kind of, supporting components to it, right? You need to not only store the data, but once you have it stored, you need to protect it, secure it, provide some intelligence around it so that you can find it, and ultimately manage and automate that data. The virtual infrastructure actually has some components that overlay with this, right? So you still need to secure it. You're definitely going to try to manage and automate it, but there's also other components as well. So things like being application aware, Cloud OS, right? Totally new concepts. Things like Azure and other cloud operating systems that are out there, cloud technologies, and VDI, right? Virtual desktops. So what's a cloud and how do I get one? So I'm working the booth here. I work a lot of our shows, work with customers, and a common question we get is people come up and they'll say, what is the EMC cloud, right? How much does it cost? Can I buy one? We don't have a cloud, right? There's no cloud. There's not an EMC cloud product. I don't know anybody that really sells a cloud product, and if they do, it's marketing. Cloud it's a combination of things, right? Cloud is a combination of technologies, and it's usually going to be specific and different for everybody's environment, right? So if you look at it, what are some of the different cloud concepts that are out there? Public cloud, private cloud. I've even heard of like hosted private cloud, hybrid clouds, and earlier this week even maybe thunder clouds, right? So there's all these different types of clouds that are out there, floating out there that you tend to hear about. I'm going to focus specifically on a private cloud, right? So for me, a private cloud is where the IT department is virtualizing their environment. They're able to lower their IT cost while still enabling flexibility, reducing complexity, and ultimately being able to improve quality of service and having managed expectations, right? Being able to have a flexible IT as a service. That's the end goal, is being able to run your business as a IT as a service and being able to potentially even do chargeback into your environment. Even if you're not a hoster, you can charge back into your company, into your business units, know how much they're charging, and be able to make it very flexible and automated. So why are we talking about the private cloud now? So if you look at this study that was done across the Fortune 100 customers, essentially 72% is being spent on infrastructure and application maintenance today, right? 23% is going back into the applications, which is leaving probably around 5% for infrastructure investment. Based on this, the environment's going to blow at some point, right? There's not a way to be able to maintain and support the demands that are being put in the environment. So how do you get to that private cloud, right? So if you look at it, a lot of people, how many people are virtualizing today? Nice. How many people would you say is fully virtualized? So a couple based on a lot of hands that people are doing some level of virtualization. How do you get there? How do you get to be a fully virtualized data center, right? And not just necessarily servers. You know, we'll talk about that too. You can virtualize storage and you can virtualize networking, right? There's a lot of ways to virtualize. So how do you get to a fully automated virtualized data center? It truly is a journey, right? It's not something that's going to happen overnight. Obviously, you guys are all aware of that. It's something that takes a lot of time, like any journey. It takes a lot of time, proper planning, probably a lot of patience, and a lot of ways to have to go back and, you know, and fix things along the way and learn as you go. So in today's world, you're looking at, you know, increasing complexities, inflexibilities, rising costs in the IT environment, and ultimately trying to get to unprecedented levels of efficiency, control, and choice. So let's jump into what is the journey? What are the phases of the journey? So there's really, as we see it, three main phases into a private cloud journey. So phase one is the IT production. This is where you're testing out virtualization. You're looking at it, playing with it, tend to find low-hanging fruit. Servers in the environment that can be virtualized won't really have an impact on anything. Maybe it's test dev, you know, other servers in the environment. I actually find a lot of customers will look at potentially virtualizing Exchange at this point, right? While Exchange has a impact on the business, it can be a low-hanging fruit, right? Exchange has a lot of server roles associated with it. You don't necessarily have to virtualize the whole thing. You can take out some of the front-end roles and have very minimal impact. So you can start virtualizing. At this point, you're probably 15 to 30% virtualized, right? Phase two, now you're cooking, right? Now you're in the business production phase. So you're actually able to say, you know, hey, virtualization's working for me. I'm getting a handle on it. I'm comfortable with it. I'm going to start virtualizing. I'm going to go ahead and virtualize some of my main business applications, doing things like SQL Server, SharePoint, you know, SAP, other kind of critical mission critical applications. And at this point, you're getting to about 50 to 80% virtualized. And then that last phase is IT as a service, so running your IT as a business. And at that point, you're essentially 95% and on. You're fully virtualized. And at that point, you're really set up to be able to, you know, move into, if you wanted to, a private cloud, or excuse me, a public cloud and a hybrid cloud model. So let's look at phase one. I call it dipping your toe in the virtual water. So in phase one, this is where you're looking to initially virtualize. So the most important thing here is analyze, assess, plan, right? Be prepared. Find opportunities for consolidation. Find opportunities where it's a good fit. And the most important thing is ensure your workloads are going to be a fit. Because what you don't want to have is, you know, I had a customer come by the booth the other day and was talking to us about would his workload be suitable for consolidation and for virtualization. The more we talked to him, he explained that, well, we don't really have a good handle on our environment. Our workloads are very high, performance is not really good, and we haven't bought new servers in a long time. You know, maybe not the best fit for virtualization at this point. And so ensure the workloads are a fit, understanding the I/O requirements, and then also looking at things like tools like the MAP toolkit, if you're not familiar with, Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit. So MAP will go through and analyze your Windows and Linux servers to be able to determine what is a fit for virtualization, be able to provide a comprehensive report on what is a fit for virtualization, And they'll even give you that has a ROI tool that will show you what is the potential power and cooling savings if you virtualize this environment. So it's a great free toolkit from Microsoft. So a good way to be able to go through and do some initial analysis of the environment. So in this case, in our journey here that we're going to talk about, I want to focus a little bit on Exchange. I mentioned I see a lot of customers virtualizing Exchange. So in this case, let's go with the scenario of, in this initial phase, we're going to look at virtualizing Exchange throughout our journey. So as you do this, things you need to be aware of is whatever you do when you virtualize, you can't take shortcuts. You can't change the rules now. You still need to treat it as it's a physical environment. You still need to follow best practices, support guidelines. So treat it like you're doing it physically, just do it virtually. What I mean by that is things like, don't take mailbox servers and put database files and log files on the same spindles because I can now, right? Continue to separate these out, give you optimal performance for workloads. Architect for the application, not for virtualization. So continue to focus on the application. I mentioned refer to support policies. I assume most people saw this week even. So Microsoft announced the extended or enhanced, I think they called it, support for Microsoft virtualization and virtualization of Microsoft Exchange. So continuing to understand that, right? So Microsoft's support statement was around support for virtualizing the unified communications role as well as being able to support Microsoft Exchange virtualized in a live migration or high availability scenario. So understanding what the support statements are, following the guidelines. A couple of best practices that I've thrown in here is things like mailboxes that you're virtualizing from the same DAG should not co-locate, right? So separate those out for workload, ensuring that you don't run into performance problems. Spread your CAS around, and this goes with the hub servers as well. So ensure that those front-end servers are spread out, right? So that they can be performance intensive. You can have a high performance processor and memory utilizations on these roles, so it's a good idea to kind of spread those out, as well as, if you put your CAS, right, so your client access servers in which your users are all accessing their email systems, if you put them all on one physical server and that server goes down, you could potentially have a lot of unhappy customers or users because they can't get to their server. So spread it out. It helps you from that old don't put all your eggs in one basket. Deploy with fixed disks. So just overall best practice with Exchange, making sure that you don't run into a problem where the drives expand and you could potentially have failures on the VMs. And then scale up and scale out, right? So don't be afraid to increase the size of the servers and be able to add in more processors and resources to be able to support the workloads, but also scale out, being able to do multiple servers and spread out that workload. So this is one of those examples of, I'm not going to talk specifically about what we do as a company, but overall, right, as you're virtualizing, you're probably going to be looking at a storage solution. It just happens. People are consolidating workloads. They need that additional space, maybe the I/O requirements. There may even be necessary for things like high availability. So as you're choosing hardware requirements for a virtual world, ensure that you're picking something that's efficient and simple, right? It's got to be easy to manage, but flexible. So just because you're deciding to deploy, say, on iSCSI today, you don't want to get locked into that. Ensure that it supports the ability to all your protocols in case you decide to change that over, do fiber channel at another day. CIFS, you can consolidate additional workloads for file services on the same box. Automatic storage tiering, I think, is a requirement in the virtual world, and I'm going to get into a little bit more details about what this is. And then out-of-the-box integration, so being able to support natively things like Hyper-V, System Center, providing additional benefits into these. Specific to Exchange, I would say consider something, a hardware solution that has dynamic capacity provisioning, right? Traditionally maybe known as thin provisioning. The reason for this is you look at it, and I pick on Exchange a little bit here because Exchange has been one of those applications that the size of the mailboxes are just growing out of control, right? And you see recommendations to be able to create these huge mailboxes. And if you look at it in this example, if I had just 5,000 users and I'm asked to create 5 gig mailboxes, I'm allocating 25 terabytes of data up front, right? That's a lot of space I'm giving to my users. And a majority of my users may never grow to 5 gig mailboxes. So that's just unused space that's sitting out there. So with this thin provisioning, what you can do is you can essentially create 5,000 mailboxes with 1 gig mailboxes. Now I'm only allocating 5 terabytes up front. And what happens is as the environment grows, so if a user goes beyond 1 gig mailboxes, the disk can actually expand out and give more space to the users without having to configure it, but you're not over allocating that up front. So it's a great way to be able to provide, less space up front, but have the security in the back end to support it. When you're looking for guidance around virtualizing Exchange in this initial phase and best practices, this is an example of some of the workloads that are out there. So we worked closely with Microsoft and Cisco to create a virtualized reference architecture. And what we did is we took 32,000 mailboxes and virtualized them on the Cisco UCS blades on the EMC backend. And what we wanted to do is continue to do things like use native Exchange replication, right? So we're not trying to force technologies down people's throat. This is what we find a lot of customers use. They want to continue to use Exchange replication, virtualize every role in this environment. So we did all mailbox roles, all front-end roles. The entire environment is virtualized with Hyper-V. And in this scenario, we use the thin provisionings that I just mentioned to be able to allocate less space up front. And in this scenario, we were able to build out 32,000 mailboxes with just 24 VMs. So it's a great solution, be able to reference, look at best practices, and design guides as you're building it out. Now, I'd also recommend, as I mentioned, looking for things that are, as you're virtualizing and moving into a private cloud, I'd say there's an importance around simplified management of the environment. So one of the things that I will talk about is a tool that we have that EMC's developed to simplify management for Windows and a virtual environment. And so what we've done is been able to take this tool and based on MMC and be able to easily and automate storage creation for Windows servers. And so what I mean is you can essentially log into this tool. You can discover your host, discover your storage arrays, and then you can just select wizards to do things like, I want to create a disk. I don't want to have to know all the different steps into creating a disk, like going into an array management screen, creating volumes, creating LUNs, setting permissions into my host, being able to create drives onto Windows, format it, alignments. So what we've done is we've automated all these tasks for you and made it easy for managing a storage environment. So you can create a disk, you can create a cluster disk, you can create a cluster share volume drive, you can create mount points, and you can even, from an application, create, say, a SharePoint farm or an Exchange database. So all soup to nuts, right? From this one screen, I can go in and have all the drives created. I can actually have my SQL databases created. I can have my SharePoint sites created, and it'll all be presented out and ready for use immediately, following best practices. The other thing we've done is we've actually incorporated the ability to do reporting on my virtual environment, right? So one of the challenges that we find is that as you're deploying VMs in your environment, it's hard to know where they're at. Where do they sit in the disk subsystem, right? So if I have a set of VMs that are on a server that are attached to a set of drives on the back end, and I'm seeing some performance challenges, how do I track that down? How do I find out where that VM lives and what drives it's on, and maybe what array and what LUN? So we actually have the ability to discover all of this information. We pull it out of SCVMM, all the VM information, and then we map it out to the back-end storage so that you can, in a visual representation, I can look at all my hosts, all my VMs, how it's attached to the server, what drives, and where it's sitting. So if you look at some of the use cases, and these are all free tools. That's, like I said, I'm not here trying to sell you on stuff. It's free tools just to help simplify the environment. So some use cases would be, where are my LUNs coming from? So being able to understand that mapping I talked about. I may, if I need a SharePoint web application deployed. So being able to automate that process, eliminate costly mistakes, all following best practices for a SharePoint environment. So I've got a demo here I'll show you. So here's an example of the tool. You essentially can select the storage system you want to attach to, provide the appropriate credentials. And from here, I can get all the detailed information I need on the storage subsystem. Right? So I can look at block and file. Includes shared folder information for CIF shares, as well as all the LUNs and so forth, and then all my host. And from here, I can select, in this case, the example of create a disk. So I select the array I want to create it on, what volume, and then I give it a name, a description. I can choose if I want it to be a thick or a thin. Select what drive letter I want to use, and it's done. So again, this goes through and it actually creates the volumes, the LUNs on the storage side. It sets all the permissions for the host, and then it creates it in Windows, mounts it in Windows, formats it, sets the proper alignment, and it's ready to go. Same thing with clustering. So I can go through and create a cluster drive. Similar process. Select my volume, give it a name, set the size of it. In this case, we'll set it as a thin LUN. Select our drive letter. And what this does is that when we have the option to create a clustered share volume. And what this does is this actually not only creates it and presents it into Windows, but actually presents it into Cluster Manager as well, which we'll see. So our storage shows up, it's ready to use. And in Cluster Manager, I have a cluster disk that's shared and ready to use, so I can create a cluster on. Now this is the ability to report on my VMs, right? So now I can track in, and this is pulled out of SCVMM. I can look at my hosts, and I have the ability to look at it from a VM perspective, a host perspective, a storage perspective. So I really have kind of multiple views to be able to report on where all this information lives. So if I pull in, I'll look at the host details. And I can start drilling in on some of the information. So if I look at the volumes, it shows me what VMs actually reside on this host, and then the backend storage that it's attached to. So it gives me details such as the storage name, how it's attached, what the RAID group is, and then in this case, I can start looking at the actual storage details. So if I wanted to look at what LUNs are on that, what's the device IDs, and the actual target information. So this gives me the ability to track down VM locations. It's a great way to be able to troubleshoot and manage my virtual environment and the underlying storage, essentially. So in this case, I'm able to track down on the VM what array it's attached to, how it's attached, the details of it, what's the RAID group. And then ultimately be able to do all this through commandlets. So I could script it out if I wanted to. It even gives me the ability, if I wanted, at this point, I could also do a live migration from this window. So as we move into the next phase, right? So, okay, we've done some low-hanging fruit. We've done some easy virtualization. Let's move on into the full speed ahead. So into phase 2. So at this point, I'm really looking to start virtualizing my mission-critical applications. I want to virtualize the data center, essentially. And I'm starting to get more aggressive about virtualizing. I'm able to identify what's a fit opposed to the other way around, right? I'm actually, instead of trying to find low-hanging fruit, I'm trying to find things that can't be virtualized. So one of your design goals should be that the end users don't know if they're on a physical or a virtual, right? I have no idea when I log in to my machines if I'm on a virtual Exchange server or a physical Exchange server. Benefits you're able to achieve at this point is significant reduced power and cooling. You can start showing the business significant savings by virtualizing, right? Easier management, and at this point, as you're virtualizing more applications, it gives you the ability for simplified high availability and disaster recovery, right? Because by virtualizing my environment, so for instance, if I have a SharePoint server with multiple applications that are using it, and if I can virtualize these, I can essentially create consistency groups of these. I can be able to create highly available, not only just my SQL server, but the applications as well. I can replicate all of these together and back them up together. I can also do a full restore of my Windows environment, right? I no longer have to have just a server standing by to be able to do a restore of, right? I can actually restore the entire environment. So at this point, as we go through the journey, we're looking at, let's go ahead and consolidate and virtualize our SQL Server and SharePoint. So again, some of the best practices is continuing to follow Microsoft best practices for SQL and SQL Server and SharePoint. We can't take any shortcuts. And I think it's important at this point really to use things like perfmon to understand the I/O requirements, right? Be able to design and make sure that you have a full understanding of the memory utilizations, the processor utilizations, the disk I/Os, and that you can design it out. Right? You still want to design your back ends for optimal I/O to be able to achieve and be able to meet the I/O requirements for these applications. Make sure you're creating separate networks for public traffic, Hyper-V management, and storage connectivity, and then continuing to follow things like placing database and logs on separate spindles for optimal performance. Now, in the old world of designing disks on a server, on a storage, you would, like Exchange is a great example of this. Exchange, we would always end up using a lot of spindles for I/O. You're designing things for I/O, and you have a lot of unused space, right? So the I/O requirements become so high, you're designing out these large volumes, these large disk subsystems that have a lot of spindles for I/O, but then ultimately they don't really use the full size of the drives. So it becomes short-stroked, and short-stroked on the drives, you get poor performance in this environment. Now with the introduction of things like flash drives, you can actually get screaming performance, but really that's not a cost-effective solution to be able to build out flash drives across the board in your entire environment. So one of the things I think is encouraged to look at as you're virtualizing environments is being able to use things like automatic data optimization. So this is not a unique concept in the data storage world. So being able to essentially create a pool of disks and take a mix of drives and put them in there, right? So I could take flash drives and SATA drives and put them in a pool of disks. And now what I can do is I can put my VMs into this pool of disks, and I no longer have to design and say, okay, I want this VM on this flash drive, and this VM on this fiber channel drive, and this VM on this SATA drive, and trying to design it out, right? Because then what happens if you have say a SQL Server workload in which I've seen this a lot of cases where you have a SQL Server workload, very low input throughout the month. At the end of the month, then somebody runs a report, and you have extremely high I/O requirements, and then it goes quiet again. So what this does is essentially you have a mix of drives, and as the I/Os increases and there's a need to have faster response times, those blocks actually get moved up into flash drives, right? So your data may reside in SATA. If you have a high workload pop up, the blocks can actually move up automatically into flash drives, give it the response time it needs, and then move those blocks back down to the, say, SATA drives or low-cost drives for you. So it's a great way to be able to manage and automate and meet the I/O requirements for your environment. And this is important. As you're virtualizing multiple applications and consolidating these workloads onto one system, you want to be able to manage this I/O workload without any manual intervention. So part of this, at this stage of the journey, a lot of people are looking at System Center, right? System Center is a great way to start taming the data center. So you're able to manage your physical and virtual environments, right? You're able to automate many tasks, and you have a lot of templates within SCVMM, be able to do PowerShell integration, and it's a great way to be able to manage the environment. So one of the things that we've been working on is how do you manage your storage in this environment? Because today, System Center Operations Manager focuses really just on the servers, on the physical servers and the virtual machines. So we've created a series of SCOM management packs to allow you to be able to do monitoring and discovery and health reporting of the SAN environment as well. So again, now at this point, I'm able to manage and automate the entire data center. And what this does is essentially gives you the ability to do reporting through SCOM on my overall system center, or my overall storage environment. So here we can pull in a health view of our storage arrays. We can look at the actual attached devices. We can get detailed views about each one, so names and IP addresses and status of all these devices, and then actually be able to get a relationship for all the attached drives and LUNs and information associated with the array. So in this case, we're able to look at our storage processor, all the relationship of the components throughout. You can see that it has a health reporting as to the status of the devices, and being able to pull actually this information out of an operation manager shell. So what this does is actually goes through and pulls out all of the information directly from SCOM to be able to do PowerShell commandlets with. So if you look at it, being able to pull out the actual storage system element names, the class names, and information directly out of PowerShell. Now in this particular implementation, it's using SMIS, so Storage Management Interface Standard, which is what SCVMM 2012 is based on, right? So what this gives you is the ability to manage and automate storage natively through System Center. So from here, we can now actually tie this into a Pro Pack and tie it into SCVMM, right? So we can get a health report on the storage system. So if it sends up an alert that there's a problem, we can pull in and take a look at it. And in this case, it's showing that we have a disk that is actually running out of space. And so it's sending out an alert that we have a limited free space on the disk for the administrator. So what we've done is we've created a Pro Pack or a Pro Tip to be able to handle this and be able to ultimately be able to take a VM and move it off of a set of drives onto another set of drives that have more space available, so that you don't have to worry about potential data loss. Right? So in this case, in this example, we'll go through the Pro Tip, is that it shows that the system's down. We've run out of space. It'll automatically pause the VM, that's running on that drive. A pro tip will pop up, and it'll give us the option to be able to move this off to another set of drives that has more space. So if we select to implement, we'll show here that we're actually going to move on the back end, move the VM or the set of VMs off of that drive onto another set of drives. And here the pro tip is successful, and we can go ahead and restart our VM. So as I mentioned, at this point, it's a great opportunity to be able to implement high availability in the environment, right? So things like cluster share volumes, which is really a unique use case with Microsoft, that CSVs is something new we hadn't seen before. CSVs gives you the ability to essentially have multiple servers or nodes accessing the same LUN or volume, right, simultaneously. Gives you a consistent namespace. And one of the advantages of it is it actually becomes less data to manage, right? It's easier to manage, and it's a great solution to be able to plug in with live migration. Well, one of the challenges is with cluster share volumes with live migration is it's a great local protection, but what happens if I have, site level protection? So at this point, if you're using, say, a shared storage system, right? If you have a primary site that has both the servers, physical servers, the VMs, and the storage systems all on one site, and if that fails over, how do you handle that environment? Because your VMs may fail over, but if the storage is unavailable, there's nothing you can do. So there's a lot of different solutions out there. One that's a great fit is something like a geo-cluster scenario. So you can actually take a cluster and stretch it across two physical locations. So I can take a cluster using the storage replication. I have my data replicated to the other site. My cluster is actually stretched across two physical sites so that if my server goes down and the storage goes down, the server will fail over, and it will actually coordinate with Microsoft clustering to ensure that those LUNs and those disk resources will come online before my applications and my VMs try to. So it'll help you protect and ensure that your data will come up and be ready for use before the application looks for it. It fits in with Microsoft Hyper-V as well and live migration. So as you're virtualizing SQL Server, another reference architecture or use case in which we've gone through and given examples of how to virtualize and expectations you can expect with virtualizing SQL. So we took a recent use case and we said, let's virtualize SQL Server 2008 and let's measure performance. And one of the things we want to do is let's compare a virtual environment and a physical environment so we know what to expect, right? So the first thing we did is we did that and virtualized physical, virtual, and saw that we had pretty similar results. And then the next thing we did is we said, we want to take the ability to so essentially use flash drives and the storage subsystem and extend the cache of the array and see if we can get a performance increase for the virtual environment. And so when we did that, or for the SQL environment actually in this case, but when we did that, we were able to get 3 times the performance, right? So what we were able to show is that if we were virtualizing SQL Server and we had some cases in which the workload in SQL may not be a fit for virtualizing because of the high I/O requirements, that we can essentially extend the fast cache, be able to use flash drives to extend the cache, give better performance, and actually make those environments a use case for virtualizing. We've also recently created a virtualized SharePoint scenario. So virtualized SharePoint with a failover clustering in this case, so be able to do a full failover clustering scenario with Hyper-V. And what we did is we took a SharePoint farm and using Metalogic StoragePoint technologies, we were able to actually go in and archive out data, stale data or inactive data, and use the concept of tiering on the array, right? So we were able to take lower cost SATA drives and a mix of fiber channel and flash drives, and be able to take the data that lives on expensive storage today, archive out 90% 92% of it onto lower cost SATA drives and be able to improve overall performance, right? Greater capacity while still virtualizing the entire environment. So once you're here along your journey, it gives you the ability to, you've virtualized your IT-owned applications, you've virtualized your business-critical applications. Kind of what's the next step, right? So continuing to virtualize the data center, virtualize storage, right? Virtualizing storage is going to be next, and the concepts are very much the same. So virtualizing storage workloads. So being able to take data and share it among multiple storage arrays, right? Use the processing power of multiple storage arrays. Being able to take a storage volume and virtualize it. It makes it accessible to multiple locations. So a scenario of this is being able to essentially take a storage array, virtualize it, being able to synchronously access data across multiple sites, and asynchronously be able to spread data across long distances, right? So from a virtual perspective, if you look at like the virtual storage, we can essentially take a volume, virtualize it, and we can make it accessible to two different hosts at the same time in a mirrored configuration. So what that means, if I'm doing live migration, I'm no longer replicating data. I don't need to replicate an array from one place to another. I can actually have live migration with servers and VMs accessing servers, accessing virtual volumes located in remote places, right? So it's a great scenario to enable VMs to move across physical locations while accessing virtual storage volumes. So it'll be the next wave, I guess, into virtualizing your data center, and as we continue to virtualize through the environment. And what this does, this gives the ability to do things like connecting a private to a public cloud, right? So storage federation, and I can do things like I've virtualized my clients, my applications, and now I can look at extending that out, right? As I've virtualized in my environment, I may want to move data out to a public cloud, maybe move it back in at times, right? So it gives me that flexibility. And then the last step on my journey is moving into the IT as a service, right? Once I've fully virtualized my environment, I can now realize the benefits of IT as a service. And really, what does that mean? It means like policy-driven, right? Managing your outcomes, right? Being able to better reliability, workflow orchestration, things like Microsoft Orchestrator, and chargeback for usage, being able to run IT as a business. So things like what was Opalus, Microsoft Orchestrator, provisioning commandlets. So an example of this is being able to create a help desk ticket that can go through and be sent through the organization that would automatically say, create storage for you. So I may be able to submit a ticket that I need storage created for my environment. And the ticket's going to get submitted. Opalus or Orchestrator, I get used to that, has the ability to go through, automatically say, create underlying storage, create the volumes, LUNs, and then be able to pass the ticket on and be able to create the SharePoint site and be able to report that back. Another example of it is that we'd be able to, say, collect information in by having array information in a SCOM. So if I have an alert pop up where I've now had potential failure on the array, I can actually have, as part of the process, logs automatically collected, routed to the support personnel, phone calls and emails sent out, and my trouble ticket process is already underway, right? So it gives me the ability to automate a lot of my environment and being able to track data and track usage overall. So kind of in closing, the journey to implementing cloud, I think, is the biggest point I could make is that it's unique for every environment, right? No two scenarios are the same. So again, there is no one cloud for everybody. There's no what is your cloud. It's a combination of technologies that are out there to help you. And Microsoft Hyper-V virtualization is the key to helping realize that, right? Virtualization is the underlying component that makes this all happen. You want to be able to do a customizable dynamic virtual environment that's both scalable and highly available. And there's no single solution from one vendor. You're going to be looking at multiple vendors to be able to build out your cloud scenario. And then lastly, enjoy the ride. These are exciting times, right? It's great to see all the different technologies, all the different companies that are born out of this, different roles. There's things like a cloud architect role. There's these just new business processes. There's a lot of great technology that's coming out of it. So it's a good thing. So kind of the standard slides I'm sure you guys have seen. So some of the resources that are available through Microsoft. Complete evaluation, and you may win some goodies. And there's the tag that if you want to scan it. So with that, any questions? Okay, thank you.